Hello everyone and welcome back to Academicscope. Today we're covering chapter 3.1 Economic Growth in Macroeconomics. So let's get started. This topic is the first topic in Macroeconomics paper 2 and often comes up. This is what the specification requires you to know. You have to be able to explain what is meant by economic growth, calculate and explain how it is measured with reference to GDP and GDP per capita, which we'll cover. You also have to be able to analyze recent and historical GDP data from either a graph, table, or even a passage of text. Then, the two 6 markers they can ask you relate to analyzing the determinants of economic growth, including investment, changes in technology, size of workforce, education and training, availability of natural resources, and government policies. You also have to be able to evaluate the costs and benefits of economic growth, including the impact on economic, social, and environmental sustainability. So, the definitions and explanations that you can be tested on. Economic growth is known as growth in GDP over time. GDP, or gross domestic product, is the total value added of goods or services produced in the country in a year. GDP per capita is simply the GDP divided by the population of the country. You can be asked to calculate this or state its definition. A boom is a period of high economic growth and employment. A recession is a period when the country's GDP falls for 2 consecutive quarters. And rate of growth is change in GDP over the original GDP times 100. These are very easy 2 markers or even multiple choice questions that you can be assessed on, so you don't want to be losing marks on this. Now, analysing the determinants of economic growth. This page might seem like a lot of information, but I'm going to try to break it down as much as I can. You must understand that economic growth can come out because the economy is able to supply more goods or services, and these are called supply-side factors. Factors of production are needed to produce goods and services. Now everything in bold is clearly listed on the specification, and I'm going to show how it can lead to economic growth. The labour force is the number of people who work in a country, and more people means more people are working, which can lead to more supply and more output. Investment refers to spending on capital goods. More investment means the economy has the ability to produce more goods in the future. Changes in technology. Although this might explain itself, you often have to explain it really well to get the mark. Technological progress means the quality of capital goods improves and gives capability of capital, and it can now produce more output than before. Education and training. This affects the quality and quantity of the work done. So the more educated and literate and trained the workers means the higher the output of the country. Labour productivity is measured as the output per worker over time. Higher productivity encourages economic growth and for stock, which means more stock can be produced. The size of the workforce. The economy can produce more if it has more of a factor of production known as labour, seen in the very first point. The labour force is the number of people who work in a country. Natural resources. If a country discovers or develops natural resources, this can be a stimulus to economic growth. Supplies of oil and natural gas can help, as these are factors of production. And government policies. Expansionary government policies can also help economic growth. Mixed economies, based on the market system of allocating resources, are in most countries and are more efficient, compared to planned economies where the government allocates its resources, like North Korea, but that point is rarely mentioned. Now, the other 6 mark you can be asked, which is evaluating. In my opinion, some people view these questions as hard, but simply memorizing the points can help you structure a well-developed answer, and once suited for the very specific case study, you can get those top 6 marks. Benefits of economic growth. A rise in material living standards. On average, everyone will have more output available to consume than before. The average income of the population has also risen as GDP rises faster than the population, so GDP per capita increases. A reduction in poverty, as output and incomes rise, so the government receives greater tax revenue, which is able to use to raise standard of living for unemployed people, for example through unemployment benefits such as universal credit or job seekers allowance. A rise in the welfare of the population. Economic growth leads to more tax revenue, whether from income tax or VAT. This means money can be spent on services such as health and education, which increases the general welfare of the population. You can lead this chain of reasoning into many different branches, but I went with the fact infant mortality rates fall, life expectancy can increase, and periods of high economic growth and productivity due to less sick days. But many examples at that last line are acceptable. A rise in employment. More workers are required to produce the extra output brought by economic growth. You can say a derived demand for labour because more workers are wanted, and that can lead to higher employment. Some costs of economic growth include in the environmental cost of production and consumption of good, of pollution of land, air and fresh water, even being able to mention noise pollution. Air pollution due to high rates of economic growth often leads to increase in carbon dioxide emissions and lower air quality, leading to high risks of global warming and climate change. Congestion. Urbanization is often a cause of economic growth in certain areas and can lead to traffic congestion. Loss of non-renewable resources. Economic growth uses resources such as oil and coal, which have a limited supply. If they are used now for economic growth, they cannot be used in the future. A lower quality of life. Though growth can make people better off wealth and monetarily wise, working hours might increase, leading to unhealthy lifestyles, and obesity or diabetes can often occur. And lastly, inequalities of income and wealth. Not everyone benefits the same from economic growth, and benefits can be unevenly spread, so the gap between the rich and the poor may become wider due to economic growth. This is not listed in your specification, and I want you to know that clearly, but I think it can help you understand. So if you want to skip forward to when we do the exam question, feel free to go ahead. The aggregate demand is consumer consumption plus investment plus government spending plus the difference between exports and imports. Let me say that one more time. AD is equal to consumption plus investment plus government spending plus exports minus imports. And you can see the diagram on the left. If they ask you about economic growth, you can talk about any of these factors increasing, leading to a shift right in AD, or an increase in economic growth. And the inverse. If any of these factors decrease, it can lead to a decrease in economic growth. And the only thing that can make aggregate supply shift right is an increase in the quality and quantity of the factors of production, which we understood a few minutes earlier in the determinants of economic growth, such as education and technology. You do not have to draw this, but it can help you really understand the concept, which is what I'm trying to do here. Now, the exam question. I want you to take your time reading this as it's quite wordy, and then we'll go through it together. Feel free to pause the video now. Alright, the question is to evaluate the costs of economic growth in the UK. Let's read through the case study together. The GDP growth rate is often used to measure economic growth. Higher GDP per capita indicates that on average people have improved living standards. Higher economic growth is, however, often accompanied by inflation and higher interest rates. Some costs have been mentioned. Concerns have recently been raised about the impact of economic growth on environmental sustainability, another cost which should be underlined, because industrialization and vehicles cause pollution and climate change. Again, stuff I had previously mentioned in the costs. Therefore, some economists suggest that focus on growth should be on renewable energy industries and improved rail transport. And then there's a lot of data which you should feel free to reference within your answer, as it can help you maximize your marks through application. Uganda is a less developed economy, which has implications for its technology, education and life expectancy. Its economy is now benefiting from trade and from better communications, and therefore it's growing at a relatively high rate, because the economic structure is becoming less dependent on agriculture. This is in fact not relevant to this question, and it was most likely used for a previous question in this case study, so you can completely ignore that last paragraph. Some costs you may have written: negative externalities from polluting industries, and more travel by car and plane, which increases carbon emissions. There could be more use of plastic in waste, more use of finite resources, especially energy. High inflation, which was directly mentioned within the extract, can affect business confidence and penalise those on fixed incomes, or those whose wages do not rise in line with inflation. For that point, you can write real wages fall. High interest rates, which could penalise those needing loans, and more unequal income distribution. I would like to exaggerate the point that you simply cannot just write the bullet points. You have to go through the chain of reasoning, which I've detailed in a previous video, and I'll link that down in the description, titled How to Answer GCSE Economics 6 Markers. I simply listed out the points in this way to make it easy for you to understand. A chain of reasoning would make you develop the points and go through the analysis. And now, moving on to the evaluation, which is necessary in an Evaluate 6 marker. You can say it partly depends on how economic growth is achieved, whether or not it's through high polluting industries or through investment in new technologies with less negative externalities. You can also say when the UK growth rate falls, unemployment rises and tax revenue decreases, so there's more government debt than austerity. Therefore, economic growth, despite its negative aspects, is necessary to improve living standards. Focus should be on the kind of economic growth and associated transfer requirements. You can say the short, medium, and long-term effects are very different. Investment in renewable energy sources is only a long-term solution to lowering the cost of economic growth. But remember, your evaluation point can be completely different, yet completely valid, because it depends on the first point you made. And the evaluation point should be relevant to that. It cannot simply be random. Thank you for watching Academic Scope, and tune in next time where we do topic 3.2, because I'm trying to cover all of macroeconomics, because I believe everyone deserves an A star. Thank you for watching.